In the summer of 1936, while the world watched the Berlin Olympics, Heinrich Himmler received a classified report that would launch one of the most secretive archaeological expeditions in Nazi history. Hidden within ancient Tibetan texts, German scholars claim to have found references to a golden artifact of unimaginable power, one that could grant its possessor dominion over entire nations. This wasn't fantasy or folklore. This was the beginning of the Nazi quest for the Ark of the Covenant, and what you're about to discover will reveal how close they actually came to finding it. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, I want to make a quick invitation. If you're new to the channel and want to follow more content like this, subscribe now and hit that like button to help the channel grow and continue bringing you quality content. Now, let's get back to the story. The golden sands of Egypt stretch endlessly under a scorching sun. Deep within forgotten tombs, Nazi archaeologists work by torchlight, their uniforms damp with sweat and anticipation. Above ground, SS officers study ancient maps while radio operators maintain contact with Berlin. This scene, repeated across multiple continents throughout the 1930s and early 1940s, represents one of history's most ambitious and disturbing archaeological campaigns. Every person alive carries within them an instinctive fascination with lost treasures and ancient mysteries. The Ark of the Covenant represents the ultimate convergence of these human obsessions, a sacred relic that has captivated imaginations for over 3,000 years. But for Adolf Hitler and his inner circle, this wasn't about curiosity or academic pursuit. They believed that possessing biblical artifacts would grant them supernatural authority to fulfill their vision of a 1,000-year Reich. The Nazi quest for the Ark wasn't a Hollywood fantasy. It was a meticulously planned operation involving dozens of expeditions, hundreds of scholars, and millions of Reich marks. From the mountains of Tibet to the deserts of Ethiopia, from ancient European castles to secret Middle Eastern excavations, Nazi teams searched relentlessly for the most sacred object in Jewish and Christian tradition. What makes this story even more remarkable is how close they came to success. Declassified documents reveal that by 1943, Nazi researchers had narrowed their search to 3 specific locations, each supported by compelling historical evidence. They possessed medieval manuscripts describing the Ark's journey out of Jerusalem. They had established contact with Ethiopian priests claiming direct knowledge of its whereabouts, and they had decoded Templar symbols that seemed to point toward a hidden chamber beneath a European cathedral. But to understand how Hitler's obsession with biblical artifacts nearly changed the course of World War II, we need to travel back to 1935 and meet the man whose theories would convince the Führer that divine power could be captured, contained, and weaponized. Vienna, Austria, 1935. In a dimly lit apartment overlooking the Danube, a brilliant but controversial archaeologist named Otto Rahn puts the finishing touches on a manuscript that will reshape Nazi ideology forever. Rahn, barely 30 years old, has spent the last 5 years researching medieval Qatar traditions in southern France, convinced that these persecuted Christians possessed secret knowledge about biblical artifacts. His book, Crusade Against the Grail, presents a radical theory. The Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant are not separate relics, but different names for the same object. Heinrich Himmler reads Rahn's manuscript in a single sitting. The SS Reichsfuhrer, already obsessed with Germanic mysticism and ancient religions, sees in these pages the scientific justification he's been seeking. If biblical artifacts truly possess supernatural power, then recovering them wouldn't just be archaeologically significant, it would be strategically essential. Within weeks, Rahn receives an invitation to join the SS as a researcher in their newly formed Ahnenerbe, the ancestral heritage division dedicated to proving Aryan supremacy through historical evidence. The timing couldn't be more perfect. Hitler has just announced Germany's rearmament, violating the Treaty of Versailles, and tensions across Europe are escalating rapidly. But behind the scenes, the Führer is pursuing a parallel strategy that few historians have fully understood. While his generals prepare for conventional warfare, Hitler is investing enormous resources in what his inner circle calls Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons that could decisively tip the balance of any conflict. The Nazi fascination with supernatural artifacts didn't emerge from nowhere. It grew from a toxic combination of genuine archaeological discoveries, perverted Christian theology, and desperate political ambition. Throughout the early 1930s, German archaeologists working in the Middle East had made remarkable finds. In 1932, teams excavating near Babylon uncovered cuneiform tablets describing the transport of Jewish sacred objects during the Babylonian exile. These weren't vague legends, they were detailed administrative records, complete with inventory lists and destination coordinates. Even more compelling were the discoveries made by German expeditions in Tibet. Since 1938, SS teams led by zoologist Ernst Schaefer had been documenting Tibetan religious practices, ostensibly for scientific research. But their real mission was far more specific. Ancient Tibetan texts, some dating back over 1,000 years, contain surprisingly detailed descriptions of a golden chest that had traveled from Jerusalem through India and into the Himalayan monasteries. These texts describe the object's power to communicate with divine forces and to strike down enemies with supernatural fire. Otto Rahn himself becomes the perfect embodiment of Nazi archaeological ambition. Born into a middle-class Bavarian family, he showed early brilliance in languages and history, mastering Latin, Greek, and several medieval dialects by age 20. His university professors recognized his potential, but they also worried about his tendency to blur the line between rigorous scholarship and romantic speculation. Rahn didn't just want to study the past, he wanted to resurrect it. His obsession with the Cathars began during a hiking trip through southern France in 1928. Visiting the ruins of Montségur, the last Cathar stronghold that fell to Catholic crusaders in 1244, Rahn experienced what he later described as a spiritual awakening. Local legends claim that on the night before the fortress fell, several Cathar priests escaped with their most precious treasure, carrying it through secret mountain passages to safety. Traditional historians dismissed these stories as folklore, but Rahn saw them as historical fact waiting to be proven. For 7 years, Rahn lived among the villages of Languedoc, learning their dialects, studying their traditions, and mapping every cave and ruined castle in the region. He discovered that Cathar poetry contained coded references to a sacred vessel that would return in humanity's darkest hour to restore divine justice. More intriguingly, he found connections between Cathar symbols and those used by the Knights Templar, the medieval order that had protected Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land for nearly 2 centuries. The Templars fascinated Rahn because their history perfectly paralleled what he believed about the Ark's journey. Founded in 1119, the Knights Templar had been granted unprecedented access to Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem, where they conducted mysterious excavations for nearly a decade. When they emerged from those underground chambers, they possessed wealth and knowledge that transformed them from a small group of knights into the most powerful organization in medieval Europe. Their sudden prosperity could only be explained, Rahn argued, by their discovery of something extraordinary beneath the Temple Mount. When the Templars were suppressed in 1307, many of their treasures disappeared. But Rahn had traced their possible routes of escape, following connections between Templar properties and Cathar strongholds. His research suggested that fleeing Templars had entrusted their most sacred relics to the Cathars, believing that these mystical Christians would better understand their true significance. Heinrich Himmler found Rahn's theories irresistible because they offered a complete alternative to Christian theology. In the Nazi version of history, the Ark of the Covenant wasn't a symbol of God's covenant with the Jewish people. It was a technological artifact created by an advanced Aryan civilization that had once ruled from Atlantis. The Jews hadn't been chosen by God. They had simply stolen this device from its rightful owners. Recovering the Ark wouldn't be blasphemy, it would be historical justice. By 1936, the Ahnenerbe had grown from a small research group into a massive organization with offices across Germany and expeditions on every continent. Their headquarters in Berlin occupied an entire city block, filled with laboratories, libraries, and workshop spaces where teams of scholars analyzed artifacts, decoded ancient texts, and planned increasingly ambitious expeditions. Maps covered the walls, marked with hundreds of potential archaeological sites, each color-coded according to its likelihood of containing biblical artifacts. But the most significant development came in late 1936, when German intelligence networks in Ethiopia reported something extraordinary. Italian forces invading the country had encountered unexpected resistance from Ethiopian priests, who claimed to be protecting sacred relics that had been hidden in mountain monasteries for over 2,500 years. When interrogated, captured priests consistently mentioned a golden chest that had arrived from Jerusalem during the reign of King Solomon, brought by the Queen of Sheba herself as part of a diplomatic marriage alliance. These weren't random folk tales. They were consistent, detailed accounts that aligned perfectly with biblical chronology and archaeological evidence. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church possessed manuscripts, some written in ancient Guiz script, that described the Ark's journey from Jerusalem to Aksum in precise geographical detail. Even more compelling, radiocarbon dating of the manuscripts confirmed their authenticity, placing their composition within centuries of the supposed events they described. Himmler realized that Italy's invasion of Ethiopia presented an unprecedented opportunity. German military advisors were already working with Italian forces, providing them with strategic guidance and technical support. It would be relatively easy to embed archaeological teams within the occupation forces, giving them access to Ethiopian monasteries and their ancient archives. The political chaos of invasion would also create perfect cover for more aggressive excavation techniques that wouldn't be possible under normal diplomatic circumstances. But what none of them anticipated was that their quest for the Ark would soon intersect with intelligence networks spanning 3 continents, drawing them into conflicts with British archaeologists, Soviet agents, and a secret Ethiopian resistance movement that had been protecting their most sacred treasures for over 2 millennia. But what no one expected was that a chance discovery in a bombed monastery outside Rome would reveal the location of medieval maps so detailed and accurate that they would transform the Nazi quest from theoretical research into operational reality. Rome, March 1943. Allied bombing raids have reduced much of the ancient city to rubble, but for SS Oberfuhrer Wolfram Sievers, commander of the Ahnenerbe, the destruction presents an unexpected opportunity. Medieval buildings that have stood sealed for centuries now lie open to the sky, their hidden chambers exposed for the first time in generations. In the ruins of the monastery of Santa Maria degli Angeli, German recovery teams discover something that makes Sievers immediately contact Berlin through encrypted channels. Hidden behind a false wall in the monastery scriptorium, they uncover a collection of documents that shouldn't exist. These aren't ordinary medieval manuscripts. They are detailed maps and travel journals created by Knights Templar during their final desperate years, between 1307 and 1314, when they were fleeing persecution across Europe. But what makes these documents extraordinary is their precision. Using measuring techniques that wouldn't be formally developed until the Renaissance, Templar cartographers had created detailed geographical surveys of 3 specific locations where they claimed to have hidden their most precious relics. The first location is Rennes-le-Château, a small village in southern France that Otto Rahn had investigated years earlier. The Templar maps reveal underground chambers beneath the village church, connected by tunnels to natural caves in the surrounding hills. More importantly, the documents include architectural drawings showing the exact dimensions and construction details of a stone chamber specifically designed to house a rectangular object measuring approximately 4 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, and 2.5 feet high, dimensions that match biblical descriptions of the Ark of the Covenant perfectly. The second location is even more intriguing. The maps point to Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, but not to the chapel itself. Instead, they detail a complex of underground vaults beneath the nearby Rosslyn Castle, connected to the chapel through a network of tunnels carved directly into the bedrock. Templar engineers had apparently spent decades creating this hidden repository, complete with drainage systems, ventilation shafts, and multiple escape routes. The journals describe the transport of the Sacred Vessel of Solomon to this location in 1312, just 2 years before the last Grand Master of the Templars was burned at the stake in Paris. But it's the third location that truly electrifies the Nazi researchers. The Templar documents describe a site in Ethiopia, near the ancient city of Aksum, where they claim to have established contact with local priests who already possessed knowledge of the Ark's location. According to these medieval accounts, a Templar delegation had traveled to Ethiopia in 1298, following rumors that the Queen of Sheba's treasure remained hidden in mountain monasteries. What they found exceeded their expectations. Not just stories and legends, but detailed records and possibly the artifact itself. Heinrich Himmler receives Sievers' report while inspecting concentration camps in Poland. Despite the mounting pressures of a war that's turning increasingly against Germany, the Reichsfuhrer immediately authorizes 3 simultaneous expeditions to investigate each location. The timing is crucial. By March 1943, even the most optimistic Nazi strategists realize that Germany needs a decisive advantage to avoid defeat. If the Ark truly possesses supernatural power, it could still turn the tide of the war. The French expedition faces immediate challenges. Rennes-le-Château is located in territory controlled by the French resistance, who have been monitoring German archaeological activities throughout the region. Local fighters, many of whom are descendants of families that have lived in the area for generations, possess their own knowledge of the village's hidden chambers. They've been protecting these secrets from treasure hunters for decades, and they're not about to let Nazi archaeologists succeed where others have failed. SS Sturmbannführer Hans Kammler, an engineer who would later become famous for his work on V-2 rockets, leads the German team in France. Kammler approaches the excavation with military precision, using explosive charges and mechanized equipment to break through stone barriers that have protected the underground chambers for 700 years. What his team discovers validates the Templar maps completely. The chambers exist exactly as described, complete with carved symbols that match Templar iconography found at other sites across Europe. But the chambers are empty. Scratches on the stone floors and walls suggest that something heavy was dragged across the surfaces, but whatever the Templars hid there has been removed. Local resistance fighters, when captured and interrogated, speak in riddles about the treasure that travels and guardians who never rest. Their apparent knowledge of the chamber's original contents suggests that the removal was recent, possibly within the last century. Meanwhile, the Scottish expedition encounters different but equally frustrating obstacles. Rosslyn Chapel and the surrounding area are under the control of British military units, making covert excavation impossible. German intelligence attempts to infiltrate the site using archaeologists with false credentials, but British counterintelligence has been monitoring Nazi archaeological activities since 1940. Every German attempt to access Rosslyn is detected and thwarted, forcing the expedition to rely on aerial reconnaissance and analysis of historical documents available in neutral countries. The Ethiopian expedition, however, shows the most promise. German archaeologist Ernst Herzfeld, who had previously worked in Persia and Mesopotamia, leads a team disguised as medical personnel providing humanitarian aid to Italian forces. Their cover story allows them to travel freely throughout the Ethiopian highlands, where they make contact with priests from the Orthodox Church who are surprisingly willing to discuss their monastery's ancient treasures. What Herzfeld's team discovers in Ethiopia surpasses even their most optimistic expectations. The monastery of St. Mary of Zion in Aksum possesses a collection of manuscripts that provide the most detailed account of the Ark's journey out of Jerusalem ever recorded. These documents, written in ancient Guiz and translated into Latin by Portuguese missionaries in the 16th century, describe not just the Ark's arrival in Ethiopia, but its subsequent movements between different monasteries as various political and religious conflicts threatened its security. The manuscripts reveal that Ethiopian priests have been playing an elaborate shell game for over 2,000 years, moving the Ark between multiple locations to protect it from foreign invaders. Sometimes it rests in mountain caves accessible only to specially trained monks. Other times it's hidden in plain sight, disguised as an ordinary church altar in remote village chapels. The priests who guard these secrets pass their knowledge through an oral tradition so closely guarded that even today, only a handful of individuals know the Ark's current location. But the most remarkable discovery comes when Herzfeld's team gains access to a chamber beneath the St. Mary of Zion Church. There, in a stone sanctuary that hasn't been opened to outsiders in living memory, they encounter something that defies their expectations. The chamber contains an object matching the biblical description of the Ark, a wooden chest overlaid with gold, topped with carved angels, and radiating an energy that their electromagnetic detection equipment cannot explain. However, the Ethiopian priests present a stunning revelation. This object, while ancient and sacred, is not the original Ark of the Covenant. It's a carefully crafted replica, created during the Babylonian exile to protect the true Ark from capture. The real Ark, according to the priests, had been moved to another location centuries earlier, when Ethiopian rulers realized that their country would eventually face invasion by European powers. The priest who shares this information with Herzfeld does so for a specific reason. He's elderly, probably in his 80s, and he believes that the world is entering its final era before divine judgment. In his view, the Ark should be revealed to bring about this judgment, cleansing the world of evil before establishing God's kingdom on earth. He doesn't realize that his German visitors represent the very evil he hopes the Ark will destroy. This revelation creates a crisis within the Nazi expedition. If the Ethiopian replica isn't the true Ark, then where is the original? The priest hints that it was moved to where the sun never sets on Solomon's wisdom, but he dies of natural causes before he can explain this cryptic reference. His successor, a much younger priest who's deeply suspicious of foreign visitors, refuses to provide any additional information. As 1943 progresses and Germany's military situation deteriorates, the pressure on all three expeditions intensifies. Himmler demands results, threatening to reassign the archaeologists to combat units on the Eastern Front if they can't produce tangible discoveries. Otto Rahn, meanwhile, has begun expressing doubts about the entire enterprise. His letters to colleagues suggest that he's horrified by the Nazi regime's increasing brutality and worried that seeking the Ark for military purposes might bring divine retribution rather than divine favor. These concerns prove prophetic when the French expedition encounters its first serious setback. While excavating beneath Rennes-le-Château, Kammler's team breaks through into a natural cave system that extends far deeper than their maps indicated. Several team members, including 2 experienced engineers, disappear during an underground survey that goes wrong in ways the official reports never fully explain. Local resistance fighters claim that the cave system is protected by more than just natural hazards, speaking of strange lights and sounds that discourage exploration. But just as it seemed that all 3 expeditions might fail, a decoded message intercepted from British intelligence revealed that the Allies possessed information about a 4th location, one that neither the Templar documents nor the Ethiopian priests had ever mentioned. and one that would lead the Nazi searchers to a discovery that would terrify them more than anything they had imagined. Bletchley Park, England, November 1943. British codebreakers working on intercepted German communications discover something that makes them immediately contact the War Cabinet. Hidden within routine military dispatches between Berlin and various field units, they detect references to Operation Annenberg, a systematic archaeological program that appears to be consuming enormous resources despite Germany's desperate military situation. But what truly alarms British intelligence is a decoded message from Heinrich Himmler to his field commanders, authorizing the use of any necessary force to secure artifacts that could change the fundamental balance of the war. Winston Churchill himself reviews the intercepted communications, and his response is swift and decisive. Within days, a classified unit known as the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives section receives expanded authority and additional personnel. Officially, this unit exists to protect European cultural treasures from wartime destruction. Unofficially, they're tasked with ensuring that Nazi Germany never acquires any artifact that could provide them with strategic advantage, supernatural or otherwise. The British investigation reveals that the Nazis have overlooked a crucial piece of the puzzle. Medieval chroniclers hadn't just recorded the Templars' activities in France, Scotland, and Ethiopia. They had also documented a secret expedition to the British Isles that predates the Templar Order itself. In 1098, during the First Crusade, a group of Norman knights had discovered something beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and transported it not east to Ethiopia or south to France, but northwest to a remote island off the coast of Scotland. This island, known today as Iona, had been a center of Celtic Christianity for over 500 years before the Normans arrived. The monks who lived there possessed their own traditions about sacred objects that had been brought from the Holy Land by early Christian missionaries. When the Norman knights arrived with their mysterious cargo, the Celtic monks recognized its significance immediately. They built a special sanctuary to house it, using construction techniques that combined Norman engineering with ancient Celtic stonework. British archaeologists, working under military protection, begin excavating on Iona in early 1944. What they discover validates the medieval accounts completely, but it also reveals why the Ark of the Covenant had never been found by previous searchers. The object hidden on Iona isn't just ancient, it's actively dangerous. Their initial surveys detect electromagnetic anomalies, unusual radiation signatures, and temperature variations that suggest the artifact is somehow generating energy through unknown means. Dr. Margaret Murray, a renowned archaeologist and expert in ancient religions, leads the British excavation team. Murray had spent decades studying pre-Christian religious practices across Europe and the Middle East, and she approaches the Iona discovery with both excitement and extreme caution. Her preliminary reports, classified at the highest levels, describe an object that defies both archaeological and scientific understanding. The structure housing the artifact is unlike anything found at other medieval sites. The chamber walls are lined with a crystalline material that Murray's team cannot identify, and the air inside maintains a constant temperature regardless of external weather conditions. More disturbing, several team members report experiencing vivid dreams and waking visions after spending time in the chamber, dreams that seem to contain information about historical events they couldn't possibly know. Meanwhile, German intelligence networks have detected increased British activity around Scotland's Western Islands. By spring 1944, Nazi reconnaissance flights are photographing the Iona excavation site, and German U-boats are conducting surveillance missions in the surrounding waters. Heinrich Himmler, increasingly desperate as Allied forces prepare for the D-Day invasion, authorizes a commando raid to capture whatever the British have discovered. The German assault on Iona takes place on June 3, 1944, just 3 days before the Normandy invasion. A team of SS paratroopers, led by Otto Skorzeny, the same commando who had rescued Mussolini from Italian captivity, lands on the island under cover of darkness. Their mission is to secure the excavation site and transport any significant artifacts back to Germany for analysis. What happens next remains classified in British archives to this day. Official reports state only that the German commando raid was unsuccessful, and that all hostile forces were neutralized. But witness accounts from local fishermen describe strange lights emanating from the island, sounds unlike anything in their experience, and an aurora-like phenomenon that lasted for several hours despite the location being far too south for natural auroral activity. Otto Skorzeny himself survives the raid, but his post-war testimony reveals nothing about what his team encountered on Iona. Under interrogation by Allied intelligence, he claims to have no memory of the events following their initial landing on the island. Medical examinations reveal that Skorzeny and the 3 other surviving members of his team exhibit symptoms consistent with severe electromagnetic exposure, including temporary memory loss and unusual brainwave patterns. The British response to the German raid is immediate and comprehensive. Within weeks, the entire Iona excavation is sealed, the site is declared a military exclusion zone, and all personnel involved in the project are transferred to other duties with strict confidentiality agreements. Dr. Margaret Murray publishes no further papers on medieval archaeology, and she spends her remaining career focusing on theoretical research rather than fieldwork. But the story doesn't end there. As Germany's military collapse accelerates throughout 1944 and 1945, Heinrich Himmler becomes increasingly obsessed with supernatural solutions to Germany's strategic problems. His agents across Europe receive desperate orders to locate any artifact, any ancient text, any source of supernatural power that could still save the Reich from defeat. The Ahnenerb's activities become more frantic and more reckless, leading to discoveries that even hardened SS officers find disturbing. In the final months of the war, German archaeologists working in Austria uncover a cache of documents that have been hidden in a monastery near Salzburg since the 13th century. These manuscripts, written by a Templar knight who had participated in the original Jerusalem excavations, provide the most detailed account ever found of what the Templars actually discovered beneath Solomon's Temple. According to this knight's testimony, the Templars found not just the Ark of the Covenant, but an entire chamber filled with objects that predated Jewish occupation of Jerusalem by thousands of years. These artifacts, he claimed, had been created by a civilization that possessed knowledge of natural forces unknown to medieval science. The Ark itself was not just a container for sacred tablets, it was a technological device designed to harness and focus energies that its creators understood but that remained mysterious to later civilizations. The Templar Knights' account explains why the order had been so reluctant to reveal their discoveries to church authorities. The objects they found challenged fundamental assumptions about human history, suggesting that advanced civilizations had existed and vanished long before the biblical chronology would allow. More disturbing, the knight claimed that some of the artifacts appear to be actively influencing the mental state of anyone who spent extended periods in their presence. This revelation transforms the Nazi understanding of their archaeological quest. They realize that they haven't been searching for a religious symbol or even a military weapon. They've been pursuing technology created by an unknown civilization for purposes that remain unclear. The implications terrify even Heinrich Himmler, who orders the Austrian findings to be classified at a level above top secret and restricts access to a handful of individuals within his inner circle. The final chapter of the Nazi quest for the Ark takes place in the underground bunkers beneath Berlin as Soviet forces close in on the city. In April 1945, with defeat inevitable, Himmler makes a decision that reveals the true extent of his obsession with supernatural power. Rather than surrender or flee, he orders the destruction of all Ahnenerbe research facilities and the execution of key personnel who possessed knowledge of their archaeological discoveries. Otto Rahn had already met a mysterious death in 1939, officially ruled a suicide but suspected by some historians to have been an execution ordered by Nazi officials who considered his research too dangerous to continue. Other members of the archaeological teams disappeared during the war's final months, their fates unknown but their research materials carefully destroyed or hidden in locations that remain secret to this day. In his final recorded statement, made in a bunker beneath Berlin just days before his own death, Heinrich Himmler expresses regret not about the Holocaust or the war's devastating casualties, but about failing to unlock the secrets of ancient technology that he believed could have established German dominance for millennia. His last words, according to a surviving witness, were a warning that some knowledge is too dangerous for any nation to possess. As Allied forces swept across Germany in the spring of 1945, they discovered evidence of archaeological expeditions that had spanned continents and consumed resources that could have equipped entire military divisions, all in pursuit of artifacts that most historians had dismissed as biblical mythology. The Nazi quest for the Ark of the Covenant reveals one of history's most extraordinary paradoxes. A regime built on racial hatred and scientific materialism invested enormous resources in pursuing what appeared to be religious mythology, only to discover that ancient legends might contain technological truths that challenge our understanding of human civilization itself. The evidence they uncovered, scattered across 3 continents and hidden in archives that remain classified today, suggests that our ancestors possessed knowledge and capabilities that mainstream archaeology has yet to acknowledge. What makes this story even more remarkable is how close the Nazi searchers came to achieving their goal. The Templar maps found in Rome were authentic, leading to chambers that had indeed housed ancient treasures for centuries. The Ethiopian manuscripts provided accurate historical records of the Ark's journey from Jerusalem, complete with details that archaeological discoveries continue to validate. The British excavation on Iona uncovered an object that exhibited properties that 1940 science couldn't explain and that modern science still struggles to understand. But perhaps the most profound revelation of the Nazi archaeological quest is what it teaches us about the relationship between power and knowledge. Heinrich Himmler's obsession with supernatural artifacts wasn't just academic curiosity. It was a desperate attempt to find shortcuts to dominance that could bypass the moral and practical limitations of conventional warfare. The Nazi failure to harness ancient technology may have saved the world from an even darker outcome than the one history recorded. The documents recovered from Ahnenerbe facilities after the war reveal that Nazi archaeologists had identified at least 12 other locations where biblical artifacts might be hidden. Teams were prepared to excavate sites in Turkey, Iran, Egypt, and even Tibet, following leads that connected ancient trade routes with the movement of sacred objects throughout history. If the war had continued, or if Germany had achieved early victories that freed up resources for archaeological expeditions, the scope of their discoveries might have been far greater. Today, nearly 80 years later, many of the sites investigated by Nazi archaeologists remain active areas of research. Modern teams, working with advanced technology and international cooperation, continue to uncover evidence that validates some of the medieval accounts that guided the German expeditions. Ground-penetrating radar has confirmed the existence of underground chambers at Rennes-le-Château. Satellite imagery has identified artificial structures beneath Rosslyn Chapel that match Templar construction techniques. Ethiopian monasteries continue to guard manuscripts that describe ancient technologies in remarkable detail. The ultimate fate of the Ark of the Covenant itself remains one of history's greatest mysteries. The Nazi quest revealed that it had indeed survived the destruction of Jerusalem, that it had been moved multiple times throughout history to protect it from various conquests, and that knowledge of its location had been preserved through secret traditions maintained by various religious groups. But whether it remains hidden in a remote monastery, sealed in an underground chamber, or lost forever in some forgotten cave, no one can say with certainty. What we can say is that the Nazi search for the Ark demonstrated the incredible persistence of ancient knowledge. Medieval manuscripts that had been dismissed as folklore proved to contain accurate geographical information. Religious traditions that had been considered mythology preserved detailed historical records. Archaeological sites that had been ignored by mainstream academics yielded evidence of sophisticated ancient technologies. The legacy of the Nazi archaeological quest extends far beyond World War II. The techniques they developed, the international networks they established, and the documentary evidence they compiled laid the foundation for modern biblical archaeology. Many of today's most significant discoveries in the Middle East and Mediterranean regions follow paths first mapped by German expeditions in the 1930s and 1940s, though few archaeologists are willing to acknowledge this controversial heritage. Stories like the Nazi quest for the Ark of the Covenant remind us that history's greatest mysteries often hide truths that challenge our fundamental assumptions about human civilization, and that the line between legend and historical fact may be far thinner than we dare to imagine. If you made it this far and haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now, hit that like button, and share in the comments what you think really happened to the Ark of the Covenant. Do you believe it still exists somewhere, waiting to be discovered? Or do you think the Nazi searchers were chasing shadows and legends? Until the next video.